My husband kicked me off our private jet, but one call to my billionaire father turned his flight into the start of his downfall. The door of the private jet slammed shut behind me, the sound ringing louder than the sharp sting in my chest. My fingers tightened around the smooth metal handle of my designer handbag as I walked down the narrow aisle, my heels clicking against the polished floor. The world outside seemed so far away, the sound of the jet engines roared to life, and yet all I could hear was the unmistakable voice of my husband, blaring cold and cruel. "Sarah," Thomas began, his voice ice-cold, cutting through the low hum of the jet. I could feel his eyes on me, seething with judgment. "This is for real executives only. You need to get off." My breath hitched in my throat. My first instinct was to laugh, to pretend he hadn't just said those words, to brush it off as some twisted joke. But as his gaze remained fixed on me, his expression cold and stern, the words sank deep. He wasn't joking. He wasn't even angry. He was dismissive, utterly dismissive of me. I turned to face the rest of the cabin, where his colleagues, high-powered business people in their designer suits, sat with eyes darting away from mine as if they didn't want to bear witness to the humiliation. I tried to keep my face neutral, but my hands trembled. A knot twisted in my stomach, tightening with every second I stood there. I had spent years by Thomas's side, holding up his empire, supporting him through thick and thin. I had given him my trust, my love, and every ounce of devotion I had in me. And yet, here I was, standing in the middle of a private jet, the pinnacle of his success, being told that I didn't belong, that I wasn't good enough. "Thomas, please," I managed to speak, though my voice came out quieter than I had intended. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Sarah," he interrupted, his voice clipped, almost casual. He didn't even look up as he flicked through his paperwork. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "You know the rules. You're just not cut out for this world." I could feel my heart racing, my mind reeling. Was he serious? Was this really happening? It felt like a nightmare, the kind where you're stuck, unable to wake up, but there was no waking up from this, no escaping the shame that was slowly flooding over me. For a moment I felt as though the world had frozen. The hum of the jet's engines seemed distant, as though nothing around me was real. My skin felt clammy, and my throat constricted. My thoughts scattered, each one more painful than the last. I had given up everything for him, my dreams, my identity, my family's expectations, only to be reduced to this, to be discarded. "Get off," he repeated, this time his voice sharper, more insistent. The air around us seemed to crackle with his arrogance. The people in the cabin, still pretending not to notice, remained as silent as ever. It was like I was invisible to them. I forced my feet to move, one step at a time, as though the ground beneath me was made of lead. As I passed by his colleagues, I could feel their eyes on me. I felt small, insignificant. I felt like a shadow of the woman I used to be, a woman who had once been proud to stand by his side. I kept my gaze straight ahead, unwilling to show the tears that threatened to fall. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break down. But as I reached the door, a sharp, mocking laugh broke the silence. It was one of his colleagues, some arrogant, high-powered man who had probably never worked a day in his life without the protection of his family's wealth. He smirked at me, his eyes lingering just a little too long. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to lash out, to throw every ounce of anger I felt directly at him. But I didn't. I didn't say a word. I didn't give them the pleasure of seeing me crack. The flight attendant, her face carefully blank, opened the door for me. I stepped out onto the tarmac, the cool wind hitting my face like a slap. I could still hear the muffled chatter inside, but the door closed behind me with a finality that echoed in my ears. The ground felt unstable beneath my feet as I stood there, stranded on the tarmac, watching the jet slowly taxi away, my heart sinking with it. I wasn't just kicked off a private jet, I was cast out of his world that I had worked so hard to be a part of, his world where I had built my identity, my purpose. And now I was nothing, just a discarded wife. I fought back the tears that threatened to spill over, forcing them to stay hidden behind the wall I had built for so long. This wasn't about me anymore. This was about him, about the way he had treated me, the way he had dismissed me, the way he had destroyed everything I had ever known. But even as I stood there, fighting the crushing weight of shame, something inside me shifted. I could feel the anger rising, simmering just beneath the surface. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. I wasn't going to let him think he could humiliate me and walk away unscathed. I wasn't his plaything. With a steady breath, I pulled my phone from my bag and dialed a number I had kept hidden from him for years. My father's number, the one person who knew the truth, who knew who I really was, my father who owned the airline Thomas had just kicked me off of. As the phone rang, I realized something. This was no longer just about revenge. It was about taking back control of my life. It was about proving to myself that I was worth more than what Thomas had tried to reduce me to. And so, with a calm I hadn't felt in years, I waited for my father to answer. I knew, deep down, that this moment was the beginning of everything. The phone call felt surreal as it rang in my hand, echoing louder in the silence that had descended on the tarmac. My fingers hovered over the screen, hesitation gnawing at me for just a moment. I knew what I had to do. I knew that one simple call could change everything, but I didn't know how I would feel afterward. Would it bring relief? Or would it just deepen the hole in my chest? Could this really be the beginning of something different for me? The truth had always been there, hidden behind layers of privilege, comfort, and silence. But now, standing alone on that cold tarmac, everything came into sharp focus. I wasn't just Sarah, the devoted wife of Thomas. I wasn't just a figure at his side. I was someone else. I had always been someone else, and it was time to acknowledge that. I pressed my thumb against the screen, dialing the number I had kept secret for so long. My heart pounded in my chest as the phone rang on the other end, each tone marking a beat in the changing rhythm of my life. My father had always been a man of power and influence, someone I had been proud to stay hidden from my husband's gaze. "Sarah," my father's voice broke through, sharp and clear, familiar in a way that almost made me want to crumble. He always had that way of making everything feel solid, even when the world around me felt shaky. "What's wrong?" I could hear his concern, but I didn't want to explain everything right now. It wasn't about him, it was about me. I had spent too long in the shadows of other people's lives, blending into a role I never quite fit into. Today was different. Today, I was going to do something that might shock him, might surprise even myself. "Dad, I need your help," I said, my voice more steady than I expected. "I need you to cancel a flight, a private jet. Thomas's jet." The line went silent for a beat, and then he spoke again, this time with a hint of caution, though I could sense his attention was fully on me now. "Why? I'll explain later. Just do it. He's not who I thought he was. I need this." The words came out with an urgency I couldn't mask, but there was also something more beneath them, a plea, a request for something bigger than just revenge. I needed to feel alive again, to make a mark that couldn't be erased, no matter what the cost. My father didn't ask further questions. He never did. Not when I sounded like this, like the woman who had once stood strong before the world, the woman who used to speak up before the years of being silenced and overshadowed by Thomas's world. "Done," he replied, his voice cool and collected as always. "I'll let you know if anything else comes up. You take care of yourself, Sarah." "Thank you, Dad." I didn't know what else to say. There was a lump in my throat, but I swallowed it down. The hardest part was over, wasn't it? I hung up, the weight of my own decision settling in my chest. My fingers trembled slightly, but my mind was clear. I had made a choice. I had stepped out of the dark corner of my life and into a new light, one where I held the power I had always been so afraid of showing my true self, so afraid of what might happen if I stopped being the perfect, quiet wife. But now, there was no turning back. I looked up at the jet as it taxied slowly along the runway, my husband unaware of the storm that was brewing behind him. I watched the jet's sleek frame gleam in the sunlight, its engines roaring in defiance of everything I had once thought was my life. He sat inside that jet, oblivious to the fact that his world was about to crumble. How had I let myself become this small? How had I allowed him to treat me like nothing more than a shadow? The sadness I had once carried began to evaporate, replaced by something unfamiliar, a strange sense of freedom that I had not felt in years. My gaze didn't leave the jet. I watched as it sped down the runway, its wheels lifting off the ground. It soared higher and higher, taking Thomas away from me, taking him further into the skies of his corporate world. But this time, something was different. I wasn't watching him go with regret or pain. This time, I was watching with a sense of triumph. It was the moment when I finally realized that it wasn't him who controlled my life anymore. It was me. As the jet climbed higher, so did the realization of what I had just done. The man I had married, the man I had supported through every high and low, was nothing more than a puppet of his own ego, and I had just cut the strings. The feeling of control was exhilarating but also sobering. I knew that there would be consequences. I knew that my decision had just shattered a part of my life I had spent years building. But for the first time in a long while, I felt alive. Alive in a way that I hadn't known I could feel. The anger, the betrayal, the resentment, it was all there, but there was also something else, a release. I watched the plane disappear into the distance, knowing that it wasn't just Thomas who was flying away from me. It was everything I had once believed about myself. And as I stood there, alone on the tarmac, I realized that I was no longer the woman who would silently suffer for the sake of a marriage, for the sake of a man who didn't see her for who she truly was. For the first time, I understood what it meant to take back control. It wasn't about making him pay, although that was certainly part of it. It was about finding my own power, stepping into a future that was mine to shape. The realization hit me like a wave crashing against a cliff, overwhelming yet strangely calming. I wasn't just Sarah, the wife. I wasn't just Sarah, the background player in his grand narrative. I was Sarah, a woman with a past, with a future, and with the strength to carve out a new life on her own terms for the first time in years I could breathe, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially not Thomas, take that away from me. The moment I ended the call with my father, a strange silence settled over me. The jet was now a distant speck in the sky, and with it, my old life seemed to be drifting away as well. I stood on the tarmac, the cool wind sweeping across my face, mixing with the dry sting in my eyes. What had I just done? There was no going back now, no undoing the choice I had made. I had made a decision that would change everything, not just for Thomas, but for me. The path ahead was uncertain, but there was something electrifying about it. For the first time in years, I felt like I was in control. I turned away from the jet, my heart racing as I took a slow, deliberate step forward. The ground beneath my feet felt solid, but my mind was anything but. I wasn't sure what was going to happen next, but I knew that I couldn't just stand there, waiting for the consequences to unfold. No, I needed to move forward, to take charge of the mess I had created. I had never been good at making decisions for myself, always leaning on Thomas's choices. But that had all changed. I started walking toward the small office building just off the tarmac, the low hum of the jet engines fading into the distance. My steps were quick, purposeful, but with each stride, a part of me felt the weight of the reality I was facing. I had never allowed myself to acknowledge just how little I had been living in my own marriage, how little I had been living for myself. Now, standing in the wake of what I had done, I had no choice but to face that truth. It felt like a punch to the gut. The years I had spent buried under his expectations, his demands, his world. I had allowed myself to shrink in his shadow, believing that if I just played my part, if I just followed the rules, everything would be fine. But it wasn't fine. I was suffocating. My phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me from my thoughts. I pulled it out, seeing a text from Thomas. The words were brief, but the sting was sharp. "What the hell did you do?" it read. I didn't respond right away. I didn't know how to respond. What could I possibly say? "I just made a phone call that's going to ruin everything for you." Would he even understand? Would he even care? I slipped my phone back into my bag and pushed open the door to the office. The small, cramped space smelled faintly of coffee and paper. There was a receptionist behind a desk, her eyes flicking up as I walked in. I wasn't sure what I expected to feel when I stepped inside. Maybe relief or maybe a sense of victory. But instead, I felt something else. A quiet, almost hollow sort of realization. This was it. The point of no return. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, her voice sweet but with a hint of curiosity. "I'm here for the paperwork," I said, trying to sound confident, "for the cancellation." Her eyebrows furrowed in confusion, but she didn't question me. She simply nodded and stood to get the forms I needed. As she walked away, I found myself standing there, alone in the room, surrounded by the remnants of my old life. I had never imagined that it would end like this, that it would take something so drastic for me to realize just how much I had been holding on to, just how much I had let slip through my fingers. It wasn't just about Thomas anymore. It wasn't even about revenge. No, this was about something deeper, something more profound. This was about the loss of myself, the woman I had been, the woman I could still be if only I could find a way to stop hiding. The receptionist returned, with the forms, and I quickly signed them. The finality of it settled in my bones, like ice, and yet I didn't feel the relief I had imagined. Instead, there was only a growing sense of unease. What would my life look like now? What did I even want anymore? I stepped outside into the sunlight, the day much brighter than the storm brewing inside my mind. As I walked back to my car, the weight of my decision pressed down on me again. I had made a bold move, but would it be enough? Would it truly change anything? Or had I just played into Thomas's hands by letting him see me fall? The text from Thomas popped up again, his words sharp and angry. "You've crossed the line this time, Sarah." I could feel the anger in his words, the disdain dripping from every letter. But his anger didn't scare me. It didn't even make me flinch anymore. In fact, it almost made me feel calm because I knew, deep down, that his reaction wasn't about me anymore. It was about him, about his own pride and power, which he had always believed was untouchable. I took a deep breath and typed back a simple response. "I'm done, Thomas." The words were simple, but they carried a weight far heavier than I could have ever imagined. The knot in my stomach loosened a little as I hit send, but it didn't go away completely. No, that knot would stay with me for a while, but this time, it wasn't fear. It wasn't guilt. It was something else entirely. A strange sort of anticipation. As I drove home, the world outside seemed to blur by in a haze. The trees, the cars, the buildings, they all moved in slow motion, as though I were floating through them, not entirely present in my own life. It felt like I was stepping outside of the person I had been for so long, watching from a distance as everything I had built for myself crumbled into dust. And yet, I couldn't look away. I had always believed that I was trapped in my marriage, in my role as his wife, that there was no way out. But now, with each mile that passed, I realized something crucial. I wasn't trapped. I had never been trapped. The chains I had felt around me were of my own making. When I got home, the house felt quieter than usual. The silence echoed through the rooms, as if the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. But nothing did, not yet. I took a seat at the kitchen table, staring at the phone in front of me. Thomas hadn't called yet, but I knew it wouldn't be long before he did. And when he did, I wasn't sure what would happen, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't the woman I had been when I stepped onto that jet. I sat in the car, my fingers trembling slightly as I held the steering wheel. The air conditioning hummed quietly, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of emotions that had erupted inside me. Thomas's text still hovered on my screen, unread, as though I were waiting for him to deliver some final blow. But the more I stared at it, the less it mattered. My father's call had been the turning point, and I could feel that every second that passed was pulling me farther away from the woman I had been. But was that truly a bad thing? I took a deep breath, letting the tension in my chest soften just enough to focus. The house was only a few blocks away, and yet I felt as though I were walking through a maze of past decisions, moments where I had kept quiet, where I had swallowed my opinions, my needs, my identity. I had been an accessory in his life, a pretty thing to show off when it suited him, a shadow to step in and out of whenever his world demanded it. But that had changed. Everything had changed. The driveway came into view, and I parked the car in the empty space. The house loomed ahead, its grand exterior reflecting all the false promises I had believed in. I got out, stepping into the cool evening air. I hadn't realized how suffocating it had been until now, until I had stepped into the light of my own decisions. I walked through the front door, my steps deliberate but heavy. I could hear Thomas's voice upstairs, his words harsh and filled with frustration, but something about his tone felt distant now. I no longer felt the weight of his presence the same way I once had. It wasn't that I didn't care anymore. No, it was something deeper, something more final. His world was crumbling around him, and I could feel it. I knew it was only a matter of time before he realized it too. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to his muffled voice grow louder as he moved toward the staircase. The time for silence was over. The time for hiding was over. I didn't need to be afraid of his anger anymore. What he was about to face would be far worse than anything he could hurl at me. He came down the stairs, his face flushed with frustration, his eyes locked onto me with a look of disbelief as though he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. And for a moment, I almost felt pity for him, Almost. Sarah, he spat, his voice rough with anger. What the hell did you do? You have no idea what you've just cost me. I stood there unflinching. I didn't back away. I didn't shrink into myself. Instead, I looked him dead in the eye, my voice calm, though there was a certain weight behind it. I think you're the one who doesn't understand, Thomas. You've been treating me like I'm invisible for years, and now you're upset because you've been caught up in your own web of lies and power plays. He was livid, his fists clenching at his sides. I could feel the energy in the room shift, like the tension in the air had reached its breaking point. He was used to being in control, used to being the one who commanded attention, who made the rules. But this time, the rules had changed. Do you think this is a joke? He growled. You don't know what you've done. You've ruined everything. My business, my reputation. It's all going to collapse because of your little stunt. I could see the panic in his eyes now, the way his control was slipping. It was almost satisfying, but I wasn't here for satisfaction anymore. This was about something far bigger, something he would never understand. You don't get it, do you? I said softly, stepping closer to him. This was never about you, Thomas. This was about me, about my life, about taking control of my own destiny. His face twisted with disbelief. Your destiny? You think you've been living some kind of fairy tale, Sarah? You've had everything you could ever want, and now you're throwing it all away. I shook my head, feeling the weight of his words slide off me like water. He didn't get it. He never had. His life had been about wealth, status, and appearances, while mine had been about survival, about figuring out how to live in a world that didn't value me for who I truly was. But that had changed. It had to change. I've been living your life, Thomas, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I've been living in the shadows of your world, pretending to be something I'm not. But no more. I could see the realization creeping into his eyes, the understanding that the world he had built for himself was now slipping away. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time I could see it, he was scared. Scared of losing everything he had worked so hard to control, but more than that, scared of losing me. Losing the one person who had always been there to pick up the pieces when things went wrong. But it was too late. I wasn't going to be that person anymore. You're right, I continued, my voice steady, though a sharp edge cut through each word. You've ruined everything, Thomas. But it's not just your business, your reputation, it's your entire life. And I've been a part of that. I've been part of the destruction, and I'm not going to keep pretending that I'm okay with it. He took a step toward me, his face twisted with anger and desperation. You're making a huge mistake. You don't even understand the consequences of what you've done. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice firm. I understand that I've spent years making myself small so you could feel big. But I'm done. I'm done being your sidekick. I'm done being the wife who supports you while you play God with other people's lives. His face hardened, but I could see the fear behind his eyes, the fear that everything he had built was about to crumble. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about me taking control of my own life. This was about him facing the consequences of his own actions. For once, he was the one who was powerless. You can't undo what's been done, I said quietly, my voice carrying a weight I didn't expect. And I'm not going to be part of this anymore. He stared at me for a long moment, his lips parted as though he were about to say something, but he didn't. He couldn't. The silence between us grew, and for the first time, I realized that there was nothing more for us to say. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving him standing there, powerless, unraveling before his own eyes. He had no idea what was coming next. No idea that his empire, his reputation, was already crumbling beneath him. But I did. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free. I could feel the tension crackling in the air as I closed the door behind me. The house, which had once been a symbol of comfort and safety, now felt more like a cold, suffocating cage. As I moved through the hallway, the weight of my decision settled deeper into my bones. Thomas was still inside, no doubt seething with rage, but I couldn't let that affect me anymore. I had made my choice and I wasn't turning back. The house felt empty now, even though he was just a few rooms away. It was as if the walls themselves had absorbed all the years of resentment, the silent arguments, the unspoken truths that had always lingered beneath the surface of our marriage. Every step I took seemed to echo in the stillness, each one a reminder of how far apart we had grown, even when we were still in the same room. I walked into the living room, sitting on the edge of the sofa, my fingers playing absently with the edge of my sleeve. The silence in the house was oppressive, heavy with the knowledge that everything had changed. There was no going back to the way things were, no pretending anymore. I wasn't the same woman who had stood by his side, who had allowed herself to be swept up in his world. That woman was gone, and in her place was someone who was finally ready to take control of her own life. But even as I thought about the future, my mind couldn't escape the crushing weight of what had just happened. I had just shattered everything. Thomas's world, his perfect, polished world, was unraveling before his eyes, and it was my doing. I couldn't deny that there was a part of me that felt a strange sense of satisfaction from it, but it was quickly overshadowed by a deeper, more unsettling feeling. Was I being selfish? Was I throwing away everything we had built just to feel free? I had spent so many years trying to please him, trying to be the perfect wife in a world where I felt invisible, and now that I had finally made a stand, it felt as though I were being consumed by guilt. The victory wasn't as sweet as I had imagined it would be. The sound of footsteps pulled me from my thoughts, and I looked up to see Thomas standing in the doorway. His eyes were dark, his face flushed with anger, but there was something else there too, something that felt almost like desperation. He stood there for a moment, not saying anything, just staring at me as if he couldn't quite believe that I had done what I had. You're really going through with this, aren't you? His voice was low, almost shaking with emotion. You really think this is the right thing to do? I didn't answer him immediately. What could I say? There was no explanation that would make sense to him, no justification that would make him see the world the way I did. He had never understood. He never cared to all these years I had watched him chase after success and power, believing that those things would make him happy. But now, I knew the truth. He wasn't happy. He was empty, and I had been right there beside him, pretending that I was okay when I wasn't. I don't know what you want me to say, Thomas, I finally replied, my voice steady, though my heart was still racing. You've made your life about control, about power, about making everyone around you fall in line. But I'm not one of your employees. I'm not some accessory in your life that you can discard when you get tired of it. I'm not playing that role anymore. His jaw clenched, and for a moment I thought he might say something harsh, something to tear me down the way he always did when he was backed into a corner, but he didn't. Instead, he just stood there, his hands at his sides, fists clenched tightly. I could see the struggle in his eyes, the realization that he had lost his grip on everything, including me. You've ruined everything, he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how you could do this to me after everything we've been through. His words hit harder than I expected, like a slap across the face. The sting was brief, but it lingered. Settling deep in my chest, I had spent so many years thinking that we were in this together, that we were building something. But now, I knew the truth. We had never been in this together. He had never truly seen me. I didn't ruin anything, I said softly, my voice gaining strength. You did. All this time, I've been waiting for you to see me, for you to care. But you never did. You were too busy looking at yourself in the mirror to notice the person standing right beside you. His eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place. But it was gone before I could analyze it. He took a step toward me, and I could feel the anger radiating off him like heat from an open flame. I didn't flinch. I stood my ground, no longer willing to let him intimidate me. I've done everything for you, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. I built this life for us, for you, and this is how you repay me? By throwing it all away. I shook my head slowly, the weight of his words settling over me like a blanket of suffocating guilt. This life wasn't for me, Thomas. It was for you, for your image, for your reputation. I was just a part of the background, but no more. I won't be a part of your world anymore. The silence stretched between us, thick with the unsaid words that hung in the air. I could feel the tension, the old wounds we had both ignored for so long, and I realized something in that moment. This wasn't just about Thomas losing control. It was about me reclaiming mine. He stared at me for a long time, his expression a mixture of disbelief, anger, and something else, something softer, maybe even sad. But I didn't let myself get caught up in it. I couldn't afford to. I had made my decision and there was no turning back. I don't want to be with you anymore, I said, the words finally coming out in a rush. I can't do this anymore. I've spent too many years being your shadow, living in your world, but it's not my world, and it never was. I'm leaving. For a moment he didn't say anything. He just stood there, as if he were trying to process what I had just said. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy against the hardwood floor. I watched him go, the weight of everything settling on my shoulders. I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel free. I just felt empty. But that emptiness was mine now. It was mine to fill however I saw fit. I stood there for a long time, staring at the place where he had been, letting the finality of the moment sink in. Our marriage, our life, everything had been a lie. But now, for the first time in years, I was free to figure out who I was without him, and that, for all the pain and uncertainty, was something worth holding on to. The house felt strangely silent, like the calm after a storm. I sat in the same spot where I had just confronted Thomas, but now the space felt different. The weight of the decision hung in the air, and yet there was no immediate sense of relief. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to feel. Should I feel triumphant? Should I feel sadness, maybe even guilt? Everything about this moment was unfamiliar, and it made my chest ache with uncertainty. As I sat there, my eyes scanned the room, landing on things that once held so much significance. The family photographs that lined the walls, our smiles frozen in time, capturing moments that felt so hollow now, seemed like lies. It wasn't just the memories that had changed, it was me. I no longer recognized the woman I had been just a few days ago, the woman who let herself be defined by someone else's expectations. For years, I had hidden myself, burying my own voice in favor of Thomas's. I had been his reflection, his accessory, his partner in a game that wasn't mine to play. It had been easier that way. Easier to stay in the background, to swallow my own desires and dreams, and to make him happy. I had convinced myself that by supporting him, by being there when he needed me, I was doing the right thing. But now, the realization was glaring and undeniable. I had spent my life in a role I never wanted, in a relationship that had always been one-sided. The silence stretched on, and I realized that, for the first time, I didn't need his approval to feel whole. It was such a small thing, a revelation, but it felt monumental. I didn't need to apologize for taking up space. I didn't need to shrink myself just to make him feel bigger. The truth was that I had been living someone else's life for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to live my own. I stood up from the sofa and walked over to the window, looking out into the evening sky. The city lights below twinkled in the distance, indifferent to the mess that had been made of my life. But that's when I realized, this mess wasn't mine to fix anymore. It wasn't my responsibility to keep everything in line, to be the quiet observer while everyone else took the lead. I had a voice, and I had the power to use it. The thought struck me like a lightning bolt. My whole life, I had been waiting for someone to give me permission to speak, to express myself. But now, no one could hold me back anymore. I had been silenced for far too long, trapped in a marriage where I wasn't seen for who I really was. But now, I was beginning to see myself for the first time. I let out a breath, the tension in my shoulders finally easing. It wasn't easy, not by any means. The weight of the past few years still clung to me, heavy and suffocating, but the future felt lighter. It felt like a blank canvas, waiting to be filled with whatever I chose. And for the first time, I realized I was no longer afraid of what that future might hold. The sound of my phone buzzing on the table broke my reverie, and I walked over to it, picking it up. It was a message from my father. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" the text read. I smiled at the simple words, the reminder that I wasn't alone in this. For all the mess and chaos that had engulfed me, my father had always been a steady presence. He had always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. "I'm okay, Dad," I typed back, my fingers moving quickly over the screen. "It's not easy, but I'm getting there." The response was immediate. "Good. Don't forget that you're stronger than you think. You've always had the strength within you. Trust yourself." The words were comforting, but more than that, they felt like a challenge to truly trust myself, to believe that I could stand on my own 2 feet and create a life that was mine, not just a reflection of someone else's dreams. It was time to stop living for him, for his success, for his vision. It was time to live for me. I set the phone down and walked to the kitchen, my movements slow but purposeful. I needed to ground myself, to do something that reminded me I was still here. The sound of the kettle boiling brought a strange sense of normalcy back, as if the world outside hadn't come to a crashing halt. It was a small thing, making a cup of tea, but it felt symbolic. A new chapter was beginning, and it started with the smallest, simplest actions. As I poured the hot water into the mug, I thought about the past, about the years I had spent with Thomas. It hadn't been all bad. There were moments, fragments of happiness, of love, but the truth was that those moments had become fewer and farther between as time passed. I had allowed myself to become complicit in a relationship that drained me, that made me feel like I was nothing more than an afterthought. And for what? For a life of luxury that I didn't even want? For a status that didn't mean anything when I was alone in a house filled with emptiness? The steam rose from the mug, and I took a deep breath, letting the warmth fill me. I had spent so long trying to be someone I wasn't, trying to be the woman Thomas wanted me to be. But now, I could be myself, and that was the most liberating feeling I had ever known. I sat down at the table with my tea, feeling an odd sense of peace settle in my chest. I wasn't sure where I was going or what the future held, but for the first time, I didn't need to have it all figured out. I just needed to trust myself, trust the path that was opening before me, even if it was uncertain and unfamiliar. I could feel a new strength building inside me, like a seed taking root in the dark soil of my soul, ready to grow into something strong and beautiful. The phone buzzed again, and this time it was a call. I glanced at the screen, seeing Thomas's name flash across it. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't pick up. I wasn't ready to face him. Not yet. Maybe I never would be. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't the same woman who had picked up his calls so many times before, desperate to fix things, to please him. This time, I wasn't going to run toward him. This time, I was going to run toward myself. The tea had long gone cold, untouched, sitting beside me on the table. I hadn't even noticed it. My focus was on something else entirely, my reflection in the glass of the window before me. The world outside seemed distant, yet so much closer now that I was seeing it with fresh eyes. The soft glow of the streetlights below cast long shadows across the room, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw the woman who had been hiding behind the mask of a wife. I wasn't sure when I had disappeared into the background of my own life, but in that moment, I knew one thing: I was back. It wasn't as though I had never been here before, standing in the quiet aftermath of everything I had known. But before, I had never truly embraced it. Now, the silence felt different. It wasn't cold and isolating, though this silence was mine. I had earned it, and more than that, I had earned the right to fill it with whatever I chose. I stood from the table and walked to the small bookshelf in the corner of the room, my fingers brushing lightly against the spines of the books that had always lined the shelves. There were old novels there, ones I had read long ago when the world felt full of possibilities. But now, as my fingers traced the dust-covered covers, it hit me. I hadn't picked up a book in years. Not for me, not for my own pleasure. I had spent so much time being who I thought I needed to be, filling my days with tasks and obligations, with responsibilities that weren't truly mine. I pulled a book from the shelf, a worn copy of something that had once sparked my imagination. The pages were yellowed, and the words seemed to pulse with life as I flipped through them. For the first time in a long time, I felt something stir inside me, a longing, an unspoken desire to reclaim all the things I had set aside for so long. I had given so much of myself to Thomas, to the image of the life we were supposed to have. But what about the life I had wanted? What about the woman I used to be? I set the book down and walked to the window, leaning against the frame as I stared outside. The city was alive, bustling, full of movement, yet I felt still. I didn't feel trapped anymore. I felt free, a little scared perhaps. But mostly I felt the weight lifting off me. For the first time in my life, I could breathe without looking over my shoulder, without wondering if I was doing the right thing, if I was living up to some expectation that had been placed on me. I didn't need permission anymore. I didn't need anyone's approval. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I had spent so many years neglecting my own needs, my own desires, that now it felt almost foreign to think about what I wanted. But there it was, like a spark flickering inside me. I wanted to live for myself. I wanted to do something that was truly mine. So, I did what I hadn't done in years. I made a list of things I loved, things I wanted to try, things that had been buried under the weight of a life I had lived for someone else. I walked into the kitchen, feeling the sun warm my skin as it filtered through the window. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and I took a deep breath. This was my space now. The house felt quieter without the constant tension, without the presence of someone who had always demanded so much. The walls, once oppressive, now felt like a canvas for me to paint my own future. I could feel a shift happening inside me, like a tectonic plate moving beneath the surface, slowly, steadily. This was more than just a break from my marriage. This was a break from everything I had thought I was. I wasn't just Sarah anymore. I wasn't just the wife who had faded into the background. I was someone new, someone whole, someone who was learning to stand on her own, to build a life that was authentic and true. I spent the next few days immersed in my own thoughts, reflecting on the choices I had made. There were moments when I doubted myself, when I questioned whether I had done the right thing. But those moments grew fewer and fewer each day. I felt stronger, more certain of my decisions, more certain of myself. The world didn't feel as daunting anymore. It felt like an open road, and for the first time I could see where it was leading me. One afternoon, I decided to leave the house. It had been days since I'd done anything for myself, and it was time to step outside. I walked through the park, the breeze brushing against my face, carrying the scent of fresh grass and the promise of something new. The world felt vibrant, alive in a way I hadn't noticed before. I had spent so long trapped in my own world, the world of Thomas's success, of endless meetings and appearances, that I had forgotten how to simply live. As I walked, I thought about the future, about what I wanted to do next. I wasn't entirely sure yet, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to live the way I had been living. I wasn't going to let my life be defined by anyone else. The power to shape my own future was in my hands, and I would use it to carve a path that was uniquely mine. I passed by a small art gallery on the corner of the street, and something inside me stirred. I had always loved art. It had been one of my passions, something I had forgotten in the rush of everyday life. Without thinking, I stepped inside. The bright colors and abstract shapes filled the room, and for a moment, I was transported to another world. It was as though the paintings spoke to me, each one echoing the quiet rebellion that had been brewing inside me for so long. I lingered there for a while, lost in the beauty of the art, feeling a connection to something that was wholly mine. As I left the gallery, I made a decision. I was going to take a class. I was going to learn something new, something that was just for me, something that would help me rediscover the person I had been and the person I was becoming. The world was full of possibilities, and I wasn't going to sit on the sidelines anymore. That evening, I made dinner for myself. A simple meal, nothing extravagant, but it felt meaningful. I wasn't cooking for anyone else. I wasn't setting the table to impress or to please. I was doing it for me. As I sat down to eat, I realized how much had changed in such a short time. I had reclaimed my life, piece by piece, and I was starting to understand what it meant to truly live. I wasn't perfect. I knew there would be difficult moments ahead. But in that moment, with the warmth of the meal filling me, I knew I had made the right choice. This life, the one I was building for myself, was mine to shape, and it was only just beginning. The weeks after I had finally left, Thomas felt like both a blur and an eternity. Time passed slowly, but with each day, I could feel myself shedding the layers of the woman I once was. There were moments, brief flashes, when the old doubts crept in, the ones that told me I had made a mistake, that I wasn't strong enough to do this alone. But those moments grew fainter, less convincing, until they were just memories of someone I no longer recognized. I was learning how to live for myself, and it wasn't easy. Every small step, every action I took that was purely for me, felt like an act of defiance against the woman I had been. And yet, there was something incredibly freeing about it, a sense of peace that I had never known before. I wasn't constantly waiting for validation, for approval. I was living my life on my terms. For the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe without fear, without wondering whether I was doing the right thing. It wasn't that I didn't have moments of weakness. Of course I did. I missed the comfort that had once been my life, the routine I had known so well. There were days when the silence in the house felt overwhelming, like a presence I couldn't escape. But even in those moments, I was beginning to realize something crucial. I had spent so long being afraid of silence. But silence wasn't the enemy. Silence was my opportunity to hear myself, to hear my own thoughts without the constant noise of someone else's expectations drowning me out. One evening, as I sat in the living room with a cup of tea in my hands, I couldn't help but think about Thomas. It wasn't an obsession, just a fleeting thought that passed through my mind. I wondered how he was coping, what he was doing now that I was gone. The thought of him felt distant, like someone I used to know, someone I used to care for, but whose presence no longer defined me. The phone buzzed on the coffee table, and I glanced at it. It was a message from my father. "How are you holding up, Sarah?" he asked. The simplicity of the message brought a lump to my throat, and I found myself staring at the screen for a moment longer than necessary. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to check in on me, to remind me that I wasn't doing this alone. My father had always been my anchor, a steady presence in a sea of uncertainty, and in that moment, his support felt like a lifeline. "I'm doing better, Dad," I typed back. "It's still hard sometimes, but I'm figuring it out, one day at a time." A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time the message was simple. "I'm proud of you. You're stronger than you think." I smiled at the words, letting them sink in. He was right. I was stronger than I'd given myself credit for. I had spent so much of my life doubting myself, thinking I wasn't enough, that I needed someone else to define me. But I had learned the hard way that true strength came from within. It wasn't about what others saw in me. It was about how I saw myself. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all the things I had learned in the past few weeks, the lessons that had slowly but surely started to shape me into someone new. I had learned how to stand up for myself, how to say no when it mattered, and most importantly, I had learned that I was worthy of the love and respect I had so often denied myself. I had spent so much time making excuses for why I couldn't be who I wanted to be, but now I realized the truth. I had always been capable of more than I had believed. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. With each passing day, I grew stronger, more confident in my own skin. I had started taking yoga classes, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time for. I had joined a book club, something I never thought I could do on my own. The small things started adding up. Things I had pushed aside, things I had told myself weren't important because they weren't part of the life Thomas and I had built. But now, those things were the foundation of the life I was creating for myself. I had also started working again, taking on freelance projects that challenged me and made me feel like I was contributing something meaningful to the world. It wasn't about the money, although that was nice too. It was about rediscovering my passion, my drive. It was about finding purpose in the work I did, something I had never experienced while working for Thomas. But it wasn't just the external changes that had begun to take root. It was the internal transformation. I had spent so many years trying to fill a hole inside me with external things, success, approval, possessions, that I had never taken the time to really look inside myself and ask what I truly wanted. Now I was learning how to listen to myself. I was learning how to trust my instincts, to follow my heart without fear of what others might think. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in years. The woman who stared back at me wasn't perfect. She wasn't flawless, but she was strong, she was resilient, and she was finally starting to see her own worth. For the first time in a long time, I smiled at my reflection, genuinely, without doubt or hesitation. I had spent so many years thinking that my worth was tied to someone else, my marriage, my role as a wife. But now, I knew the truth. My worth was mine alone. It wasn't something that could be defined by anyone else. It was something I had to create for myself. And for the first time in my life, I was proud of the woman I had become. That evening, I sat down at the dining table, not as a woman who had been lost, but as someone who had found her way. I thought about the future, about what it might look like, about what I wanted it to be. It was still uncertain, still full of unknowns, but that was okay. The beauty of the unknown was that it was full of possibilities, and I was ready to embrace them. I had learned a final important lesson. The power to shape my own life had always been within me. It was never about the things I had, my marriage, my possessions. It was about the strength I had inside, the power to choose my own path, to create my own story. And now, I was ready to write the next chapter. If you've ever felt like you were living someone else's life, hidden in the shadows of other people's expectations, I want you to know that you're not alone. I spent so many years believing that I wasn't enough, that my worth was defined by others. But I'm here to tell you, just like I learned, that your worth comes from within. You have the strength, the power, and the voice to create a life that is truly yours. Don't wait for permission to live the life you deserve. Start today. Embrace your independence, your dreams, and your truth, because no one can define you but you. I believe in you, and you should believe in yourself too.